I'm Mike Vardy.
Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today.
And this is the Productivityist Podcast. Welcome to the Productivityist Podcast. I am your host, Mike Vardy, and this week on the show, Anne Bogel joins me. She's got, of course, a popular book list, several of them actually, and her reading guides. They've established her as a tastemaker among readers, authors, and publishers. She's the author of the recently released book, Reading People. So if you're listening to this as we are recording this, as this airs, it's recent. It's Reading People, How Seeing the World Through the Lens of Personality Changes Everything. And she hosts the podcast, What Should I Read Next? I am an avid reader. And this book, goes through different personality types. It's just really, really cool. And we dive into that and a whole lot more in this conversation. So here is my conversation with Anne Bogel on the Productivityist Podcast. I'd like to welcome Anne Bogel to the Productivityist Podcast. Anne, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So you're an avid reader, I take it.
I
sort of start
am.
like that. It's like, it's pretty obvious when you've got these book lists and reading guides. What got you into, I want to talk about before we dive into the book, because we want to talk about reading people, but I want to talk about a person who reads, a reading people, which would be you. What got you, have you always been an avid reader? And then what kind of pushed you into the place of, I want to share this so that more people can kind of get a sense of finding really good books to read themselves?
Well, I love the way you're calling me avid, because my husband usually said addicted. So thank you for that positive spin. I just always have been. That's a really good question. And part of me wants to say, well, my dad read me The Monster at the End of this book, and Who Stole the Apple. I don't actually know the real name of my favorite book as a kid, because my dad never called it by its right name.
Mm-hmm.
So I could attribute it to that, but so many parents read to their kids, and those kids don't grow up to be readers. And so many kids who were never read to as children grow up to fall in love with reading. So I don't really know, but I'm happy to say that it's always been my favorite hobby, my introverted coping mechanism of choice, my favorite rainy day activity. It goes way back. And
so that led to, you've written this new book, Reading People, which is not about people who read. It could be. There's no real way to know, because it's very, very subjective, but I'm sure but it's Reading People, How Seeing the World Through the Lens of Personality Changes Everything. And I just had Gretchen Rubin on the show not too long ago. And of course, she's the author of The Four Tendencies, which is a somewhat of a personality test, I would say. We had that discussion actually, where she's like, well, it's more about how you would approach obligations. In this book, you go over several different almost like the different types of personality tests that people would take. I'm simplifying it, of course, being a bit reductive, and then how you can kind of relate with these people, right?
Yes. And I love Gretchen. That's a lot of fun. Actually, she came on my podcast, What Should I Read Next? And we talked about the 4 tendencies in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of fun. And I hear what you're saying. It's not the 4 tendencies captures one aspect of something that is true about a human being. It's not necessarily a personality assessment, but I do think it functions in the same way.
Right.
It gives you a way to step back and take a look at something that you do or a way that you think and see it in a new way, and then bring those fresh eyes back out into your real life you're living. And I think that can be so helpful. And in fact, one of the frameworks is what I call them. I talk about in Reading People is Elaine Aron's theory of high sensitivity, that there are highly sensitive people whose nervous systems are way more finely tuned than 80 to 85% of the population. And that is a physiological fact. It's not truly something about your personality, but I feel like it functions in the same way. You have this tool that gives you a bit of self-awareness that changes the way you see yourself and interact with others. It's a big deal.
So it's funny you mentioned that particular chapter, that particular component, because my wife went through this book as well. She tends to, at this point, now that she's doing a lot of the booking of the guests, she tends to go through the books as well. And the one passage that's highlighted, there's a lot of dog ears in here, of course, but she's like, when HSPs get overwhelmed, their overworked nervous systems shut down because they can't take the strain any longer. I don't think that highlight was for me to go, hey, but I think it's more for me to look at it and go, oh, all right, honey. But how long have you been, when I talked to Gretchen, one of the things was, I said, she came from the Happiness Project to the Four Tendencies, which seems like it's kind of like for those people who've seen Star Wars, The Last Jedi versus The Force Awakens, it's like you were given this path and all of a sudden you took a complete right turn in another direction that no one expected. What brought you to the idea of I want to look at personality types and then, kind of wrap my head around them a bit more, because that's what's going on in this book, right?
Yes. And I get what you're saying. On the surface, you think, okay, English major and personality, what happened there? But one of the reasons I love to read is that, especially fiction, but nonfiction too, is that when you enter a story, you get to experience the world through somebody else's eyes in a way that you don't in your everyday life. You get fully immersed in somebody else's world with new characters and new settings and often impossible situations. And, those characters have to find a way forward, and they do it in a way very different than you would in circumstances very different from yours. And that is something I love about fiction. There's that great quote, I think it's George R.R. Martin, who says, "A reader lives 1,000 lives, the man who reads only one." And I love that aspect about fiction. And then nonfiction shows me so much about so many things that are outside the realm of my everyday experience and my small area of expertise. And I love that. And in the same way, a good personality framework lets you see what it might be like to experience the world through somebody else's eyes. It's such a great tool for building awareness and empathy. And they're both valuable for the same reason, both reading and studying these personality frameworks.
So I've been spending some time with these as well. Actually, when I was in Nashville at the Tribe Conference, a few of us sat around talking about the Enneagram, which I had not really looked at. Although it's really in the zeitgeist right now, especially in a certain.
Yes, it is having a moment.
It is. You mentioned it in the book. There's several. Obviously, Myers-Briggs. There's a lot of the Strengths Finder, which was the one that was having the moment, I think, before Enneagram. I think there's, which I think is when I said to Gretchen after, I said, Gretchen, I think that this is I know that the Happiness Project is your big seller, but I think this is your legacy book. This is the book that I think people are going to go, oh, it's going to be Gretchen Rubin's Four Tendencies. I think that's what's going to happen there. But which of these personality, lenses, let's use that as the terminology here, is the one that you kind of gravitate the most towards when you're because you've had to look at all of them, which is the one you go, yeah, this is the one that I tend to look at more for myself than any of the others. Is there one?
Well, before I get all wishy-washy on you, let me start by saying I'm a 9.
Okay. I think, what am I again? I want to say, someone said, I think I'm a 6, I think. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at it. I should look at it a bit deeper.
Half of people are, so the odds are really quite good.
Yeah.
So I'm a 9. I don't want to make waves or ruffle any feathers. So no, I'm kind of kidding, sort of, mostly. I have had a moment with all the frameworks in this book, which is why they're there. When I was deciding which different frameworks to include, I decided, because I had to decide somehow, to include the ones that have made a huge difference in my own life personally. And I know that there are other people who have really resonated with other frameworks, but they're not in this book because they never really did it for me. Maybe they will in the future. Maybe I'll have my moment with DISC or with the Big Five, but that hasn't happened yet. But there have been times in my life where understanding Kiersey's temperaments, or when I first learned about highly sensitive people, rocked my world in such a good way. There was a definite before and after. I will never see things the same again. This is so much better. Thank you, Elaine Aaron. But in the past few years, I've definitely been indebted to Myers-Briggs just a couple of years ago, I hired my first team members for my business, and Myers-Briggs helped me so clearly see what I was really good at and what I needed to focus on and what did not come naturally to me, that I really needed to try and hire people who compensated for my weakness in a really positive way. And that really informed a lot of that decision making. And a couple of years later, that has proven to be fantastic. All those people are still in place. It's worked out really well because they are bringing things to the table that I don't naturally have, I was going to say excel at, but have competence in, maybe a better way to put it. But also in my personal life, the past couple of years, the Enneagram has been really, really helpful, just learning as a type 9 without getting too like therapeutic on you. Just understanding how as a 9, I'm inclined to have issues with things like personal boundaries has been really, really helpful to me, not just in my personal life, also in my profession, because you are who you are, no matter what time it is of the day or where you happen to be in the world. But it has been really insightful for me and continues to be so. There's not a moment where you're like, oh, you know what? I'm done with that. I'm moving on. Like all these things continue to inform what I do and how I work and how I relate to the people I love. But the past years, those have been the most helpful.
You know what? I forgot. I'm a 3. That's what it is. I have a 6. I think it's the 6 and the 9 and the 3 are kind of all connected. I'm a 3.
Your podcast is called The Productivityist.
Yeah, I'm a 3. Yeah,
of course you are.
Yeah, I'm a 3. And I can't remember. The thing is, and there's a book that I was reading. Ian Cron, of course, talks about the Enneagram, which is where I picked it up. And there, if you want to get into that, and I'm going to focus on that for a second, it's because it's the new hotness right now. Although it's not new, it's been around forever, or at least for a really, really long time. It's just having its moment. You could check out. There's a few podcasts. I'll put that in the show notes. You know, it's interesting because when I hired my assistant, they went through the DISC test, like the DI, which is another one, and it was fascinating to me to see what after interviewing them and then looking at their DISC results, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it helped me. I think that particular type of personality test helped me decide who I needed based on what I needed in the moment for what they were good at. But I haven't, one thing I haven't done, which is I think, like you said, what you did is I need to do it on myself. I need to say, okay, you know what? And Myers-Briggs is one that I can't remember the last time I did a strengths finder a while ago, but I've not used them as compasses so much, more as just, hey, let's see what this is like. Do you find a lot of people just go, hey, let's just test, like it's a quiz, there's a reason that BuzzFeed quizzes go like crazy right now. It's like, it's like, let's just see what I am and see how, but I don't think people go past that point. Do you think that there's in your work when you were going through this, putting this book together, do you think there's maybe a reason behind that where people say, hey, I'm going to figure it out. And then, okay, that's good. I know what I am. And they don't dive really too much deeper into it.
I do know that there are truly certain personality types who are more interested in the realm of possibility and self-awareness and reflection than others. Like I'm an NF on the Myers-Briggs. So of course I wrote a book about personality. So that's not everyone's natural inclination to really want to dig into this stuff, which is fine.
We're going to take a break here for a moment so I can talk a little bit about something that's happened recently on the show. And that is our addition to Spotify. I'm pretty excited about that. It happened not too long ago. And, if you're listening to this as the episode comes out, I'm really excited to be part of Spotify. So no matter what you're listening to podcasts on, whether it's Apple's podcast, whether it's, Android, no matter where you're listening, now you can listen on Spotify as well. In fact, a friend of mine actually used his Google Home device to say, hey, Spotify, play the Productivityist podcast or play the latest episode of the Productivityist podcast. And boom, it was there. And my voice was ringing in his ears or maybe a nicer variant of that in his home. So I would love it if you are a Spotify user to jump onto Spotify and subscribe to the show there. And if you're not, and you're not subscribed to the show already, you can do that in Apple's podcast. I use, Overcast on my iPhone to listen to all the podcasts that I love. And there's so many out there. I probably should do an episode that just shares the podcast episodes that I like listening to. And then what I'd also love, if you're willing and able, I would love it if you would give the Productivityist podcast a rating and a review. in iTunes would be the best, because that's honestly where most people are looking. I don't know enough about Spotify to know if you could leave a rating and review in there at this point, but if you can, do that too. Ratings are great because it gives, the star ratings, and it helps elevate the podcast in terms of that. But, in order for us to really improve the show and make it better, it would be absolutely fantastic if you would leave a review as well. It'll show us what we're doing well, what we could improve on, and that's our goal, is to make the show better. And you can help us do that by leaving a rating and review in iTunes, in Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening to this podcast. So thanks so much. And now let's get back to the show. Now let's talk about how each of these personality types, how the different types can approach productivity differently, because as you said, we are doing a productivity podcast. So let's talk about the different types and how people approach productivity differently. Like you mentioned, me on the Enneagram, for example, being 3. Like, yeah, that's an achiever element, right? What are some of the things that you found that's maybe surprised you with how, people that you wouldn't maybe even yourself, that you're like, wow, this is how I approach productivity or time management or what have you, and I'm able to get a lot of stuff done, but it seems kind of odd that they're either counterintuitive or they don't really make a lot of sense when you don't look at them in that through that lens for a manner of kind of relating to your book.
Yes. Well, since you mentioned the Enneagram, something interesting there is that the same activity can be extremely healthy for some types of people and a horrible coping mechanism for others, or something that will make them want to curl up in the corner and cry if they keep at it. So with a type, and of course it depends. With the Enneagram, it's tricky because it depends on your level of health, but it's interesting how the same behaviors can have very different motives, and you need to know what your motives are in order to be truly productive.
Right.
In a healthy, sustainable way.
Sure.
That's important. Yeah.
Sure. And I think another thing I want to touch on is I read Quiet by Susan Cain, and it was really an eye opener. And I know you talk about it. It was because I thought of myself as an extrovert, but I'm probably more of a pseudo extrovert. So I have this ability to, which again lines up nicely with the 3 of the Enneagram in a lot of ways, right? The whole this is, and then you kind of when you're in private, there's a bit of a different thing going on. Like I need to, after I do a talk or something, I need to find a place to hide. And there's a part in Susan Cain's book where there's this professor who, on stage, you think he's the most extroverted person, but he spends what I think was like a half hour or something like that in the bathroom stall, either before or after, something like that. It's been a while since I read the book, but it's because he needs to have that. How do people, in your book, you talk about the idea of how would are you more of an introvert or an extrovert? Would you or you fall in my category, which is like an ambivert or a pseudo extrovert?
It depends. It depends on whose psychology you're currently reading. Okay. So some people think the ambivert term is really useful, but Jung would say that's garbage. You got to decide. Because with the Myers-Briggs, the introversion, extroversion determines all your other traits. So I talk about that in the book. It's really difficult to explain in 45 seconds.
And you've said you're an introvert. That's based on Myers-Briggs. Yeah, based on. But then that leads to so many other things, right? That means it leads to so many other discoveries about how you relate with yourself and with others in a lot of ways.
Well, here's the discovery that really helped me understand it better. So there are introverts and there are extroverts, nouns, but those are also verbs. And we all spend time introverting and extroverting. So I am an introvert and I can extrovert really, really well. If we met at a party, you and I could talk and chat and we could both be friendly and bubbly, and anybody watching us would never know that we were both introverts because we are extroverting so skillfully. But then if I spend too much time doing that, my fuel tank just gets so drained. And then I want to go curl up in my comfy chair and read my book for 150 pages and drink 4 cups of tea before I interact with another human being.
Right.
So we all do both, but we all have different personal levels of balance we need to maintain to feel happy and healthy and sane.
Yeah, I have a number when I'm at a party. We're having a party, actually. As we're recording this, it's just before the holidays and the Christmas holiday season. And we're having a party on the 22nd, a house party. And, you put the invite out on Facebook and the ratio is normally 25% of the people that you invite show up. No, we're looking at about 40 to 50% of the people at this point. And my brain is starting to go, okay, well, when does the party end? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, which is not like, and I'm the host. So it's like, and I can't just go hide in my office and things like that. Like, that's just not what you do. But I mean, I have a number in mind. Like, if we're at a dinner, and it's people that I don't know, like, and I've been at meetups and things like that. It depends on a few factors. Number one, it depends on how many people are there. And then it actually depends on the way that the table or the environment is arranged. If it's a circular table, I'm much more at ease because you get to see everybody. But if it's a square table or like a rectangular table, it makes it much harder for me to I then revert to being more of an introvert. Like, I will talk to that one person that's across from me, or maybe the person next to me. But then everybody else at the end of the table doesn't really exist. I think like what you were saying, it depends on circumstance and both internal and external, right?
Yes. And are you a naturally loud person?
Yeah, I'd say so. You know, I mean,
well, then that doesn't go with my theory, because I was thinking that only loud people really do well at square tables.
No, I can be loud. I mean, I've got theater voice. I mean, I can do that. I can, I mean, there have been instances where people said the mic's not working. I'm like, not a problem. I'll be fine. But again, for me, it's more about the connection than the like being able to kind of. Over the years, I've gotten much more conscious about the eye-to-eye like contact and being more focused on that, because there's so much noise around us, right? And I while I can deal with the noise and occasionally thrive in it, I don't like it. I prefer, and I think this comes as you get get older and have more. Put yourself in a position where you have more choices, is you can say, no, I don't want to do that anymore. And I think that's kind of where I'm like, I mean, I was at a gathering. It was at a pub. So the pub was already loud. And then there was about 10 or 12 people at the table. And eventually I just said, yeah, you know what, I'm leaving. And it wasn't like, I just said, yeah, you know what, I'm tired. I'm going to go. I made up some half-hearted excuse. It wasn't a lie, because I was tired. But it was, if the tables were circular, if it was a quiet environment, that would have changed my experience, which is why, like, I've been exploring things like dinner parties. Like, the reason we're hosting this party is because it's going to allow me to do two things. One, have that one face-to-face connection. Because, I mean, let's face it. I mean, I work on the internet. I I get the face-to-face time I get is normally through Skype or Zoom, or, when I go to a conference. It's a lot of my friends don't live in Victoria, British Columbia. Right. But so I wanted to have something local. And then I wanted to bring the people from the different spectrums of my life, right? Like the parents from the school, my friends from, when I did theater, my business friends, and bring them all in one place, because then I almost want to see how that all goes down. Like, do these people know each other? I mean, we're in a small city. It's likely that people know each other, but I don't want, but I want to have an element of control over that environment. Like, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does to me. And what you're saying is giving me flashbacks to when I had 2 hours in a remote part of town, out of town mostly, far from my home, where I needed to kill time before I needed to pick up a kid. And so I went to this Starbucks that usually plays like Bon Iver, just kind of chill. This is your office away from home music. And instead they were playing like the Run Run Rudolph Pandora station. And I needed to think. And I knew enough about my personality and the way I'm wired to realize I am not going to be able to be productive in this scenario. Plenty of people were there getting what appeared to be plenty of work done, but just knowing that about yourself, what the kind of environment you need in order to do your best work. Or we were talking about introversion, extroversion, like the kind of balance you need to maintain so that you can actually, literally think about what you're doing and what needs to be done and manage yourself well during your workday. Like, those are huge tools of self-awareness.
So let's talk about stepping back, because I think this is something that people don't do. Is the people that take the quizzes, they see them, they're like, oh, I want to know, but they don't take time to step back and reflect on it, or they don't take time to analyze it or dig deep. And because I think a lot of people look at these as qualitative, not necessarily how they can help you quantitatively, right? How do you, when when you're working with people, or even through your book, like, and this relates definitely to productivity, is how do you say, okay, look, I know that this may not seem to be something that will result in something that you can actually physically touch, like this quantitative kind of, look, this is going to help you earn more money or manage your time better, but if you sit with it, no matter which, and the great thing is you offer so many different options in this book. It's not like you have to do all of them, which is what I like. It's like, oh, I really only want to focus on StrengthsFinder, or I want to focus on, Myers-Briggs. That's where I want to go. How do you recommend people kind of get into this so that they can actually leverage it in a way that gives them results, that tangible results that they can build upon, as opposed to something that's just a little bit out of reach in terms of how they think about these kind of things?
Yeah, I really think what it takes is one personal moment where understanding something about personality, their own or someone else's, really makes an actual difference in their lives. And that's pretty low hanging fruit. But a lot of people are like, yeah, no. That's navel gazing. It's not for me. But if they persist just a little bit and have that experience where, like somebody read my book and they said, okay, on page 2 of the chapter about highly sensitive people, I feel like I finally understand my mother for the first time, and I'm 39 years old. Like, everything from my childhood makes so much more sense. And that was reading 2 pages. So just anytime somebody has this aha moment where they look at a situation in their life, whether it's about themselves or a person they love or a person they work with, and they can say, oh, I get it now. Like, I understand what's really going on. And once you understand what's happening, you can actually do something about it. Then they're eager to hear more because they see the difference it makes and how it's not hard. And you don't necessarily have to like turn your life upside down, but just having the eyes to see the situation for what it really is, first of all, makes you feel like you're not crazy, which is always a wonderful feeling. But also, you can't do anything about the situation until you know what's actually going on. Like, once you diagnose it, you can see how to move forward. It's not hard to do, but you do need to use a tool that's not currently in your tool belt. So you got to pick it up and try.
Yeah. And so I'm going to challenge people before we wrap up is, number 1, pick up this book, Reading People, How Seeing the World Through the Lens of Personality Changes Everything. Number 2, the next time you're thinking, oh, I read an article about StrengthsFinder, I read an article about the Enneagram, or I'm listening to this show right now, and one of these personality tests kind of intrigued me. Do the test, but then sit with it. Like, take the time to actually do the other work, because I'm just as guilty as anybody else. Is I'll take, when I was in the heart of Nashville, Tennessee, in Franklin specifically, and the Enneagram was everywhere, I sat with it briefly there, and then, basically haven't looked at it much since then. And I think that it's like anything else. It's like, if you want to learn a language, it needs measured progress. You can't just say, okay, well, I got this, and that's the end of it. Would you, as we wrap up, is that something that you would recommend as well, is just to say, hey, don't just look at, like, get introspective about this stuff on your, like, take some time and like, if you're thinking about, doing like a weekly review or something like that, like, this could be part of that.
Yeah. And I would say that a big problem for a lot of people with the personality typing stuff, especially if they see it on the internet, is that they've typed themselves incorrectly, or the information. I mean, there is great information on the internet, but it's mixed in with a whole lot of either useless or, in fact, wrong. So make sure you've really typed yourself correctly and that you're getting information from a reliable source. I explain in the book how to make sure you actually get your Myers-Briggs type right. There's so much confusion on that. And it can't be helpful to you unless you actually are able to correctly get your type and understand what's going on. Although I do think there's a lot of value in the reflective process of trying to identify it. But if you just took a quiz that took you 3 minutes on the internet, you read the description or like, I don't know if this is for me, then you're not really doing it justice. So if it's not surprising if it wouldn't be helpful to you. And I got my own type wrong for a really long time. And I talk about that in the book, how and why that happened. But basically, I was answering those survey questions with the kind of person I wanted to be and not the kind of person I was. And so it did me no good for many, many years. But once you actually understand your type, and no matter what framework we're talking about, only then can it begin to really make a difference in your life. And I would also encourage you, I share my 7 favorites in the book, the ones that have made a big difference to me, but I would say pick one and go from there.
Yeah, that's a classic thing that we tend to do. If we don't get the result we want out of one, then we tend to move on to another one so that we can get the result that we actually, like you said, that we want to be. So excellent stuff here. And thanks so much for joining me today. Where can people find you and your work online? And by the way, there's going to be some bonus material for our members. So if you're a member, Anne's going to stick around and do a little bit more for members of that community. But where can people find you if they want to learn more, other than getting the book, which is going to be in the show notes as well, the link to get that?
You can find me on my podcast, What Should I Read Next?, which is book talk, reading recommendations, and literary matchmaking every Tuesday. And my hub online is my blog, modernmrsdarcy.com.
Thanks for joining me, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Anne for joining me on the show. Hopefully you've got a sense, maybe you know what personality type you are, and you want to be able to kind of get a sense of how to read people better. So, or you want to be able to just read people better, not knowing what your personality type is. Pick up this book, Reading People, How Seeing the World Through the Lens of Personality Changes Everything. And all the links are in the show notes, of course. And, her reading lists are great. I think that reading is something that we need to take time to do. We just really need to. And no matter what time of year you're listening to this, whether it's the start of the year, the middle of the year, remember, I'm a big believer in you could start the year you want, anytime you want. Reading should be a part of that. And I'm glad that Anne was able to come and join me on the show. Big thanks to her. Big thanks to John Polstra for editing this episode and so many other episodes of the show as the producer. And big thanks to you for joining me this week on the show. Of course, there is a bonus episode. So if you are a member of the Productivityist community, go to productivityist.com/membership to get more bonus episodes, not just with Anne Bogel, but with a whole bunch of other people and a whole bunch more beyond that. So that's it for this week. I am Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast and founder of Productivityist, reminding you, stop guessing and start going.